I fell in the bathroom, and my own daughter, Olivia, saw me there on the floor and just ignored me. I asked for help, and she said, "Mom, I'm late. Figure it out. I'm not your babysitter." She just up and left me there, in agony. My neighbor, Catherine, was the one who saved me. And the most unbelievable part is that weeks later, she and my son showed up at my door, bold as brass, asking for money. I told them to look in my purse. The surprise they got was so big, they nearly fell over backwards. This is the story of how all that happened. I was on the cold bathroom floor, the tile freezing against my skin, when the door opened. The pain in my hip was a hot, pulsing ember, but the relief I felt, seeing my daughter Olivia's silhouette, almost made the pain disappear. She was all ready to go, beautiful as ever, with her designer purse on her shoulder and her car keys in her hand. The smell of her perfume, a Chanel that cost more than my groceries for the month, filled the air. "Olivia, honey, thank God." My voice came out all weak, just a wisp of a sound. "Help me, please. I fell. I think I broke something." She stopped, the hurried expression on her face frozen. Her eyes scanned my body, sprawled on the floor, then darted to the expensive watch on her wrist. In that instant, the relief in my chest turned to a block of ice. Her impatience was palpable, a nervous energy that seemed to say I was an obstacle. "Mom, I'm late. Figure it out," she said, and her voice wasn't worried. It was sharp like broken glass. "I'm not your babysitter." And with that, she took a careful step over my legs like I was an old dirty rug and walked out of the bathroom. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor in the hallway, a quick, determined sound. And then, that metallic, definitive click of the front door closing and the lock turning. But for you to understand how things got to this crazy point, to a level of cruelty I never imagined was possible, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Bernice. I'm 68 years old, and I live in Birmingham, Alabama, in the same house for over 45 years. Until that Tuesday morning, my biggest worry was whether the Sunday roast would turn out just right, or if I needed to prune the rose bushes my late husband, Robert, had planted for me on our 25th wedding anniversary. Robert. Oh, my Robert. He was a man with calloused hands and a soft heart. He worked in construction, a damn good carpenter, and he built this house with his own 2 hands. I remember every detail. I remember the smell of sawdust that clung to his clothes, the way he'd whistle while he nailed down the boards on the front porch. One summer afternoon, with the house almost finished, he held me in the middle of the empty living room, which still smelled like fresh paint, and said, "Bernice, this house is our fortress. It's where our children will always have a home to come back to, no matter what." Back then, I only had Liam, my oldest, who was just a little thing of 4. Then came Olivia, and last, Elijah. 3 children. My whole world. I dedicated my life to them. I was the mom who sewed the Halloween costumes, who baked the 7-layer birthday cakes, who spent sleepless nights with a thermometer in one hand and a cool cloth for their foreheads in the other. How many times did I pass on a new dress for myself so I could pay for Olivia's piano lessons or Liam's football gear? Robert and I, we didn't have much, but everything we had was for them. We sacrificed vacations, dinners out, everything, so they could have the best education, the best opportunities. And for a while, it seemed like it had all been worth it. They grew up, went to college, started their own families. I felt a pride so big it barely fit in my chest. But in the last 10 years, after Robert was gone, things started to change. The calls got shorter, the visits rarer, and almost always they came with a request. "Mom, can you lend me $200 till the end of the month?" Liam would ask. "Mom, can you watch the kids this weekend? Brian and I just need some time to ourselves," Olivia would say, already handing me the grandkids' backpack. Elijah, the youngest and always the most distant, would just disappear for months and only call when his car broke down or his rent was late. The house that Robert built as a fortress for our family started to feel way too big and empty. The children's laughter was replaced by the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the living room. And that's when my friendship with Catherine became my safe harbor. Catherine's been my neighbor for 20 years. A good woman, a widow like me, with a heart as big as Alabama. While my own kids were canceling Sunday dinners at the last minute, It was Catherine who'd show up at my door with a pan of her famous pecan pie, just to keep me company. For my last birthday, I got 3 generic text messages from my children. Catherine gave me a beautiful purple orchid and spent the whole afternoon with me, helping me repot it in the garden. She remembered how much Robert loved orchids. My kids, I doubt they even remember their father's name. And that brings us back to that Tuesday morning, March 14th. The day had started out like any other. I woke up, had my coffee, and sat on the porch for a while looking at the rose bushes, thinking Robert would be proud of how I was keeping them up. I'd even spoken to Olivia earlier on the phone. A quick call. "Hi, honey, how are you?" "Hi, Mom. Good, you? I'm in a huge rush. Talk fast." "I just wanted to know if you're coming for lunch on Sunday." "Sunday? Mom, I don't know. I don't think so. I'll call you later, okay? Kisses, bye." And she hung up. The same hurry, the same dismissiveness as always. I sighed, but I was used to it by then. I went to take my shower. I remember thinking that the bathroom rug seemed a little slippery, that I needed to buy a new one at Target, and that was my last coherent thought. A wave of dizziness just hit me out of nowhere. The world spun. The white bathroom walls seemed to lean in on me. My hand flew out, trying to grab the metal towel rack, but my fingers just grabbed at empty air. I felt my body losing its balance, a slow motion, helpless fall. I didn't hear the bone snap, just the dull, awful thud of my body against the floor. A hollow, final sound. The world tilted, then went dark for a split second. And then, the thud. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a dull, heavy one, the sound of my own body hitting the tile floor I had just cleaned the night before. For a moment, I just lay there, on my side, my face pressed against the cold ceramic, just feeling the surprise of it all. The pain hadn't hit yet. It was just a ringing in my ears and the strange echo of my own voice saying, "Oh," as if I'd dropped a glass of milk, not my entire body. Then the pain came. It started as a spark in my left hip and spread like wildfire, a wave of unbearable heat, deep, like a knife was twisting inside my bone. I tried to sit up, pushing against the floor with my hands, but my legs wouldn't obey. My left foot, it just wouldn't move. It was like it didn't belong to me anymore. Panic started to bubble up in my chest, cold and fast. The bathroom light hummed mercilessly over my head, and it was at that exact moment that the door opened. It was Olivia. My heart leapt with a relief so strong it overshadowed the pain for a second. There she was, my daughter, all ready to leave, purse on her shoulder, keys in her hand. Salvation. "Olivia, honey, help me." I fell. My voice was a shaky whisper. She stopped in the doorway, and the sweet, expensive smell of her perfume drifted over to me. Her eyes, the same eyes I had kissed goodnight for so many years, took me in on the floor. And then, without a word, they moved to her wristwatch. I saw the muscle in her jaw tighten. The relief in my chest crumbled to dust. Her face, which seconds before had been the image of hope, was now a mask of pure irritation. "Mom," she started, and her tone was like someone scolding a stubborn child. "I'm late. Figure it out." The words hung in the air, unbelievable. I must have heard her wrong. "What? Olivia, I can't move. Please, I need help." Desperation made my voice crack. She shook her head, a quick, impatient gesture. Her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. And then she said the words I never, in a million years, thought I'd hear from my own daughter, from the little girl I sang lullabies to. "I'm not your babysitter." The air rushed out of my lungs. I just stared at her, speechless, as she, with a calculated agility, lifted a high-heeled leg and stepped right over my motionless body. She didn't even glance back. Her steps were fast and firm, and the sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor was like a countdown to my abandonment. Click, clack, click, clack. And then, the final sound. The metallic, definitive click of the front door closing and the lock turning. Silence. A silence so deep and heavy it felt like it had a physical presence in the house. The only sound was the toilet I'd flushed before I fell, still quietly running, and the buzz of the bathroom light. The shock was a wave of cold that washed over my body, so much worse than the searing pain in my hip. The daughter I had carried in my arms, who I had nursed, who I had taught to walk, had just stepped over me like I was a piece of trash in her way. Hot, silent tears began to stream down my face, making tracks on my skin and mixing with the cold dampness of the floor. The mother who baked 7-layer cakes, who sewed costumes, who spent sleepless nights by her bedside, was now an obstacle, a problem to figure out. The ache in my heart was 1,000 times worse than the pain in my broken bone. But beneath the hurt and the shock, a tiny ember of anger began to glow. No, I wasn't going to die on my own bathroom floor. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I had to get to the phone, the old landline, the one with the cord, that sat on a little table in the hall. It felt like it was miles away. With every ounce of strength I had left, I used my arms and my good leg to drag myself. Every movement was torture. The friction of my clothes on the floor, the way my hips screamed in protest, the cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I dragged myself out of the bathroom, leaving a damp trail of tears on the hardwood floor. The hallway seemed endless. The portraits on the wall, Liam, Olivia, Elijah smiling at their graduations, at their weddings, seemed to mock me. Finally, my hands reached the leg of the phone table. With a groan that tore through my throat, I pulled myself up just enough to reach the receiver. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely dial the numbers. The first call, of course, was to Olivia. Useless. I knew she wouldn't answer, but some stupid, hopeful part of me had to try. Her phone rang and rang, then went to her cheerful, recorded voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Olivia. Leave a message." I let the phone fall to my chest. The irony was suffocating. I tried Liam, my oldest son, the man of the house, since Robert left. His phone also rang, once, twice, 3, 4 times. Straight to voicemail. No answer. My heart sank a little further. The last family hope, Elijah, my baby. His phone didn't even ring. Straight to voicemail. And that's when I understood. It wasn't just Olivia. It was all of them. In the moment I needed them most, in the most vulnerable moment of my life, I was completely and utterly alone. The fortress Robert had built was now my prison. The chill from the floor seemed to have seeped into my soul. I started to shake, an uncontrollable trembling, from cold, from pain, from pure despair. My vision was getting blurry. I needed help. Now. And then, like a lighthouse in the dark, one last name came to my mind. Catherine. With numb fingers, I dialed her number, praying she was home. The phone rang once. Twice. "Hello?" Her voice, warm and familiar, came through the line. "Catherine," I whispered, my voice choked with tears and pain. "It's Bernice. I fell. I can't get up." There was a second of pause on the other end, and then her voice sharpened, filled with an urgency none of my children had shown. "Oh my God, Bernice, are your kids there?" The word came out of my mouth like a stone. "No, I'm on my way, Bernice. Don't you move." The sound of her hanging up was just a click, followed by a silence that lasted an eternity. I lay there, a heap of pain on the hallway floor, the cold receiver against my ear. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it all, that the pain was making me delirious. Maybe Catherine hadn't heard me. Maybe the call had dropped. But then I heard the sound. Banging. Loud, urgent, on my front door, and her voice, muffled by the wood but clear as day. "Bernice! Bernice! It's me, Catherine! Can you hear me?" The tears I'd been holding back exploded. They were tears of a relief so deep it hurt. "I'm here!" I yelled, or tried to yell. My voice came out as a croak. "In the hall!" The door's locked. I heard a metallic fumbling outside, the sound of keys. Catherine had kept a copy of my key for years, ever since Robert passed. For emergencies, she always said. I just never imagined the emergency would be this. The lock turned with a loud snap, and the door swung open. Catherine rushed in, her face pale with worry. Her eyes found me on the floor, and she put her hand to her mouth, horror written all over her face. Oh, dear God. Bernice. She didn't hesitate for a second. She knelt beside me, not caring about her clean linen pants. Her hands, warm and comforting, touched my shoulder. "Don't move, honey. What happened?" "I fell. In the bathroom," I managed to say between sobs. Olivia. She saw me. She left. I saw disbelief and then fury flash in Catherine's eyes. She pressed her lips together but didn't say a word about my daughter. She was a wise woman. Instead, she acted. "Okay, I'm calling 911. Just stay calm. I'm right here with you." While she spoke to the dispatcher with an impressive calm, giving my address and describing the situation, I could only look at her. The woman who showed up with pecan pie was now saving my life. My children, my own flesh and blood, couldn't be bothered. Catherine, a friend, had dropped everything and come running. The arrival of the paramedics was a blur of firm voices and efficient movements. They asked me questions I could barely answer. "Where does it hurt? On a scale of 1 to 10? Did you hit your head?" Catherine answered for me when my voice failed. The pain of them moving me onto the stretcher was excruciating. I screamed, a sharp animal sound I didn't recognize as my own. The entire ambulance ride, with the sirens wailing, I didn't let go of Catherine's hand. She held mine tight, her eyes locked on mine, murmuring words of comfort. She was my anchor in that sea of pain and humiliation. At the hospital, the emergency room was a chaos of fluorescent lights, beeping machines, and the sharp smell of antiseptic. I was left in a hallway on a gurney, with Catherine still by my side. She dealt with the nurses, the forms, everything. When they finally took me for an X-ray, she couldn't come in. "I'll be right here when you get back," she promised. And she was. The doctor came hours later, a young man with a tired face. He held the dark film up to the light. "Well, Mrs. Thompson," he said, with a professional calm that sounded cold to me, "you've fractured your femur right here near the hip. You're going to need surgery." Surgery. The word landed on me like a sentence. And the first thing I thought was, who's going to take care of me after? I spent the night alone in the hospital room. Catherine had gone home to get some things for me, promising to be back in the morning. The room was sterile, white, and impersonal. The blanket was thin and scratchy. The pain was a constant companion, a low growl that the morphine in my IV couldn't quite silence. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the loneliness. I reached for my cell phone on the bedside table, the same phone Catherine had made sure the paramedics brought along. There was a notification. My stupid heart leaped. Was it Olivia, full of remorse? Was it Elijah, worried? It was a text message from Liam. I opened it with trembling fingers. "Mom," Catherine called. "Hope you're okay. Let me know what the docs say. Kiss." That was it. No questions. No offer to come to the hospital. No words of love. It was a message to check a box, just to clear his conscience. "Hope you're okay." It felt like a cruel joke. I typed out a reply, the anger giving me a momentary clarity. "Broke my hip. Need surgery." I hit send. The reply never came. I scrolled through my phone. Nothing from Olivia. Nothing from Elijah. Their silence was a confession. Olivia knew. She knew from the very first second. She saw me on the floor, heard me beg for help. And she did nothing. Didn't call her brothers. Didn't call an ambulance. She just went on with her day. I remembered her at 5 years old, with a high fever, crying in my lap. I stayed up with her all night, singing to her, taking her temperature every half hour until the sun came up. And now I wasn't even worth a phone call. I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep, the pain and the bad thoughts haunting me. The next morning, I felt like a wreck, a broken bone, a broken heart. I was just an old woman, alone in a hospital room. And then the door opened. It wasn't a nurse. It was Catherine. She looked tired. She probably hadn't slept well. But she smiled at me, a genuine, warm smile. She was carrying a Walgreens bag. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, her voice soft. "I brought you a few things." She pulled out a clean nightgown, my toothbrush, my reading glasses from the bag. Practical things. I nodded, grateful. And then she pulled out the last item, a small round jar with a purple lid, my jar of shea butter, the one I used every single night, for as long as I could remember, on my hands and elbows. It was my scent, my routine, a small ritual of self-care that Robert used to tease me about, saying I was going to slip right out of bed one day. Seeing that little jar there, in that sterile hospital room, was like a dam just broke inside me. Catherine, my neighbor, had remembered. She had gone into my bathroom, the same bathroom where my daughter had left me, and she had picked up my jar of shea butter. Such a small, intimate detail, an act of care so profound that my children would never be able to conceive of it. And I just broke down. The crying came with a force that shook my whole body, a ragged sob that came from the depths of my soul. It was a cry of pain, of gratitude, and of a terrible grief for the family I thought I had, and that, in that moment, I knew I would never have back. Catherine dropped the bag and hugged me, careful of my hip, and I cried on her shoulder, the only family I had in that moment, clinging to that jar of shea butter like it was the most precious thing in the world. The Oak Bluffs Rehabilitation Center smelled of disinfectant and tired hope. It was a place of long, waxed hallways, beige hospital walls, and muffled sounds. The low groan of someone in the next room, the squeak of a medicine cart's wheels, the overly cheerful voice of a physical therapist drifting from the gym. The surgery had been a success, the doctors said. They'd put pins and a metal plate in my hip. Now the hard part began, the part where you learn to walk again at 68. The days crawled by in a routine of pain and small, humiliating victories. Every step I took holding onto the parallel bars hurt like hell. Every time I managed to lift my leg an inch higher in bed, the young physical therapist, a kid named Kevin who was my grandson's age, would cheer like I'd just won a marathon. "Come on, Bernice, you got this. Just one more," he'd say, an easy smile on his face. I'd smile back, a grimace that pulled at the skin on my face, but inside, I just felt a deep weariness. Catherine came to visit every day after work. She brought gardening magazines, neighborhood gossip, and most importantly, her presence. She'd help me brush my hair, she'd rub the shea butter on my dry hands, and she'd listen to me complain about the tasteless cafeteria food. My children? A week had passed since the surgery. 1 week. 7 whole days. Liam had stopped replying to my texts. Elijah remained in his usual silence. And Olivia, well, Olivia was acting as if nothing had happened. I could see from social media, from pictures my niece liked, that she had gone to brunch on Sunday, wearing a new hat. Brunch, while her mother was learning how to sit on a toilet again. And then, on the 10th afternoon of my stay, they showed up. Liam and his wife, Sophia. They walked into the room without knocking, Liam carrying a bouquet of carnations from the grocery store, the kind that are already wrapped in noisy plastic. Sophia, as always, wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes scanned the tiny room, the metal walker next to my bed, and then they landed on me with a cold appraisal. "Mom, you gave us quite a scare," Liam said, leaning down to give me a loud, affectionless peck on the cheek. His aftershave was strong. A scare that took 10 days to register, apparently, I thought. But I forced a smile. "I'm getting better." "Thank goodness," Sophia said, perching on the edge of the room's only chair, her expensive leather purse in her lap. "We were so worried." The small talk lasted for exactly 5 minutes. They asked about physical therapy. I said it was hard. They asked about the food. I said it was bad. And then the tone shifted. "Mom," Liam started, pulling the chair closer to my bed, his voice now low and conspiratorial. "We need to talk about some practical things. Now that this has happened, we have to think about the future, get the papers in order." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What papers, Liam?" "Oh, you know, the red tape. I was looking through some documents at the house and I found Dad's life insurance policy, the one he took out years ago." My blood ran cold. Robert's policy. A $150,000 policy he'd taken out when the kids were little, to make sure they and I would be okay if anything happened. I was the sole beneficiary. It was my security, my old age fund. "What about it?" I asked, my voice firmer than I felt. "Well," he went on, ignoring my tone, "Sophia and I were talking. With the kids getting bigger, the apartment is getting cramped. We found a great house over in Mountain Brook, big backyard, near a good school. And with Dad's insurance money, we could make a really good down payment, you know? It would be a way to honor his memory, using the money to give his grandkids a better future." I just stared at him, unable to believe the audacity. Honor Robert's memory? By using my money to buy his dream house? He was already spending money that wasn't his, while I was laid up in a rehab bed with a hip full of screws. I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him exactly where he could shove his dream house, but Sophia was quicker. She put her hand on Liam's arm, a theatrical gesture of support, and turned to me with an expression of fake compassion. "Bernice, with all due respect," she began, and whenever Sophia said, "with all due respect," I knew something awful was coming. "This house of yours, it's just too big for you now, and it's dangerous. I mean, look what happened. You could have been on that floor for days." She used my fall, my abandonment against me. Bile rose in my throat. "What we were thinking," she continued, her voice syrupy and poisonous, "is that maybe it's time to think about a more practical solution. Sell the house. With the housing market the way it is, you'd get a very good price. And with that money, plus the insurance, you could move into a more appropriate place." "Appropriate?" I repeated, the words scratching my throat. "Yes," she said, her smile widening. "A nice retirement community, you know? A nursing home, one of the modern ones, with activities, 24-hour nurses. You wouldn't be a bother to anyone, and we would all have so much more peace of mind, knowing you were being taken care of." The air left my lungs in a low hiss. I stared at the two of them, at their expectant, greedy faces. They weren't visiting me. They were here like two vultures, circling what they thought was a carcass, waiting to pick at the remains. They had it all planned out. My house, the house Robert built with his own hands, sold. My insurance money in their bank account. And me, shipped off to a nursing home to die quietly and not be a bother. Liam was smiling, as if he were offering me a gift. Sophia was looking at me, expecting me to thank her for the brilliant idea. In that instant, the pain in my hip vanished. The pain, the fatigue, the sadness. It was all swallowed by a new sensation. A sharp, cutting cold that spread through my chest and cleared my mind. They had just given me the answer I needed. They had just sealed their own fate. And mine. They left. The cheap smell of carnations lingered behind, cloying in the small room. I lay there, on the hard bed of the rehab center, the silence ringing in my ears. Their words echoed in my mind, each syllable a fresh stab. Sell the house. A nursing home. Wouldn't be a bother to anyone. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the inheritance, about the money. They looked at me and didn't see a mother, a person who had loved them unconditionally. They saw an obstacle, a bank account with a timer on it. The pain in my hip returned with a vengeance, a dull, deep ache. But now there was something else burning underneath it. A cold, crystalline anger. The image of Olivia stepping over me on the bathroom floor merged with the image of Liam and Sophia, plotting my disposal as if I were a piece of old furniture. And Elijah's silence. His silence was the tacit approval of it all. They were all the same, cut from the same rotten cloth that they had woven themselves. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sophia's cynical smile. I heard Olivia's heels clicking down the hall. The humiliation and the pain of abandonment mixed with the fury of their greed, creating a poisonous cocktail that burned in my chest. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up, replaced by a determination as hard as diamond. When the morning nurse, a kind young woman named Brenda, came into the room to bring me my breakfast, watery scrambled eggs and a pale piece of toast, I had a request. "Brenda, honey," I said, my voice hoarse from the broken sleep. "Can you do me a favor? I need my purse. The one my friend Catherine brought the other day." Brenda frowned. "Of course, Bernice. But there's nothing valuable in there, is there? It's better to leave it locked up at the nurse's station." "No money, don't worry," I reassured her. "Just some papers I need to look at, my things." She nodded, and a few minutes later came back with my old leather handbag. It was a worn-out purse I'd had for over 10 years. Robert always teased me about it, said it was time for a new one, but I liked the way the leather had softened over time. I placed it on my lap. The familiar weight was comforting. I unzipped it, and the smell of old things wafted out. A faint scent of mint from the gum I used to carry. The smell of paper from the crumpled receipts at the bottom. My hands, still a little shaky, rummaged inside, past my wallet, my glasses, my jar of shea butter. And then, my fingers found what they were looking for, a thin plastic folder, folded in half. I pulled it out. Inside were the documents I always carried with me out of habit, for security. A copy of the will Robert and I had made together years ago, his life insurance policy, and the most important document of all, the paperwork for the living trust that Charles, our lawyer, had helped us set up. A revocable living trust, a trust I could change at any time. I looked at those papers, at the names of my 3 children listed as the sole beneficiaries, splitting everything equally. Liam, Olivia, Elijah, each name a stab of pain. They were the heirs to everything, to the house Robert built, to the money he worked so hard to save, to the insurance policy he paid faithfully every month, thinking of their future. And how did they repay me? By planning to put me in a home to get the money faster. The anger returned, but now it was a driving force. It was clarity. It was purpose. They thought I was a frail, senile old woman, easy to manipulate. They thought they could discard me and still reap the rewards of my life and my labor. Oh, they had another thing coming. With a determination I hadn't felt in years, I picked up a pen from the bedside table. I opened the trust document to the beneficiary page. I took a deep breath, and with a surprisingly steady hand, I crossed out Liam's name. A thick, black, definitive line. Then I crossed out Olivia's name. Another line, with even more force. Finally, I crossed out Elijah's name. His silence wasn't innocence, it was complicity. The paper lay there, with the 3 names scratched out, a visual declaration of my decision. But it wasn't enough. It was just symbolic. I needed to make it official. Irrevocable. I picked up my cell phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name. Charles Albright, attorney. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a mix of fear and excitement. It was a huge step, a step there was no coming back from. But the image of Olivia ignoring me, Sophia's voice saying nursing home, gave me the strength I needed. I hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Albright Law Offices, good morning, a receptionist's voice said. Good morning. I'd like to speak with Mr. Albright, please. This is Bernice Thompson. There was a short pause. Charles was a busy man, but he had handled my family's affairs for 30 years. Just a moment, Mrs. Thompson. The line went quiet for a few seconds, with soft classical music playing in the background. And then, his deep, familiar voice came on the line. Bernice? What a pleasant surprise. How are you? The kindness in his voice almost made me cry. Charles. My voice failed me. I took a deep breath, pulled myself together. The time for weakness was over. I'm not well, Charles. I fell. I broke my hip. I'm in a rehabilitation center. My God, Bernice, I'm so sorry to hear that. Are your children taking care of you? His question was the final spark. The irony was so cruel, I almost laughed. No, Charles, they are not. And that's exactly why I'm calling you. I paused, the weight of my next sentence filling the room. I need to make some changes, big changes. I want to amend my living trust. Of course, Bernice. We can do that when you're feeling better, when you're back home. No, I interrupted him, my voice firm as steel. I want to do it now, and I want to make it irrevocable. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Charles knew me. He knew I wasn't an impulsive woman. He must have heard the dead seriousness in my voice. Irrevocable, Bernice? Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said, looking at the crossed-out names on the paper. It's time to make the changes official. Getting discharged from Oak Bluffs was like being released from a polite prison. Kevin, the physical therapist, gave me a tight hug and made me promise to keep up with my exercises at home. Brenda, the nurse, handed me a bag with my medications and a sad smile, as if she knew I was returning to an empty house. She wasn't entirely wrong. But emptiness, I was starting to realize, could be another word for peace. Catherine came to pick me up. She maneuvered her old Buick carefully, helping me into the car as if I were made of porcelain. On the drive, she chattered about her garden, about a new cooking show she'd discovered, about everything and nothing. It was her way of filling the silence, of distracting me from the pain that every bump in the road sent through me and the anxiety that was bubbling in my chest. When she parked in front of my house, the house Robert built, I felt a pang in my heart. From the outside, everything looked the same. The rose bushes needing a trim, the paint on the porch starting to peel. But to me, that house had changed. The happy memories were now covered with a thin, bitter layer of dust. Robert's fortress had been breached from the inside. Catherine helped me up the porch steps with the walker, step by step, as if we were climbing Mount Everest. She opened the door, and the familiar smell of my home wrapped around me, a mix of lemon, lavender, and the subtle scent of old books. It was the smell of home, but a home that needed to be purified. "There you go, Bernice. Welcome back," Catherine said with a warm smile. She helped me into my favorite armchair, fluffed a pillow behind my back, and went into the kitchen. "I'll make us some tea." As I listened to the sound of the kettle being filled, I looked around my living room. The photos on the walls, on the shelves, Liam with his diploma, Olivia in her wedding dress, Elijah holding his first child. They were pictures of a life I thought was real. Now, they looked like clippings from a magazine, strange and distant. The next day, I felt a new wave of resolve. I called a car service to take me, since I couldn't drive. My first outing wasn't to the grocery store or the pharmacy. It was downtown, to an old brick building with a polished brass plaque that read, "Albright and Sons, Attorneys at Law." Walking into Charles's office was like stepping back in time. The same worn Persian rug on the floor, the same smell of leather and paper. The receptionist, a lady who had been working there forever, greeted me with a kind smile and showed me into Charles's office. He stood up from behind his imposing mahogany desk as I entered, hobbling with my walker. His eyes were full of genuine concern. "Bernice, it's so good to see you, despite the circumstances. Please, have a seat." The leather chair in front of his desk was soft and sank under my weight. He didn't waste any time. "I've prepared the documents, just as you asked. But as your lawyer and your friend, I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely sure about this?" I looked him in the eye, eyes that had seen my family's ups and downs for decades. "Charles, for the past 20 days, I've had a lot of time to think. Lying in a hospital bed, feeling a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone, you get a kind of clarity that's frightening. I've seen who my children really are. And more importantly, I've seen who they are not." He sighed, a heavy sigh from someone who knows there's no arguing. He took a thick folder from his desk and opened it. "As you instructed, I have drafted the amendment to your living trust. This amendment removes your 3 children, Liam, Olivia, and Elijah Thompson, as beneficiaries, and, per your request, it makes the trust irrevocable. That means once this is signed, you can't make any more changes." "I understand," I said, my voice firm. He passed me the papers and a fountain pen, heavy and cool and black. I read every word. The legal terms were complex, but the essence was simple. It was an act of disinheritance, an act of self-protection, an act of justice. On the last page, there was a dotted line waiting for my signature. I picked up the pen. The image of Olivia stepping over me, her voice saying, "I'm not your babysitter," flashed in my mind. Sophia's voice, a nursing home, echoed in my ears. The deafening silence of my other 2 sons. I took a deep breath and signed my name, Bernice Thompson. The definitive black ink marked the paper, and with it, the end of an era. I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't joy. It was relief. The feeling of having taken back control, of having protected Robert's legacy from their greed. Charles had his secretary come in to witness and notarize the document. Everything was done with an almost funereal solemnity. When I was finished, Charles put the originals in a manila envelope and handed me the copies. "It's done, Bernice," he said, his voice soft. "Thank you, Charles, for everything." When the car dropped me back home, the house felt different again, lighter, as if a fresh breeze had blown through and cleared out the bitter dust. I felt in charge for the first time in a long time. That night, sitting in my armchair with a cup of tea, the phone rang. I answered it. "Mom? Hi, it's me." Olivia's voice was sweet as honey, a tone she only used when she wanted something. "Hello, Olivia," I replied. my voice neutral. I was just thinking, I know you're back home and you must need help. How about I come by tomorrow? We can catch up, see what you need. I miss you so much. Miss me or miss my money? I thought. Her hypocrisy was breathtaking, but I played the game. My plan was just getting started. Of course, dear. That would be lovely. Wonderful. I'll be there after lunch. Kisses. Love you. Goodbye, Olivia, I replied, and hung up before her lie of, I love you, could contaminate the air of my newly purified home. I knew exactly what she wanted. She was coming to scout the territory, to gauge my fragility, assess my finances, see if the nursing home plan was still a go. Little did she know the game had changed, and the first piece was about to be moved. The doorbell rang at 2 o'clock sharp. I was already waiting, sitting in my armchair with a cup of lukewarm tea in my hands and my heart beating in a calm, controlled rhythm. Through the lace curtain, I saw her 2019 BMW parked out front, a $45,000 car that I knew she and her husband could barely make the payments on. I opened the door before she could ring again. Olivia stood there, smiling. The smile was wide, white, perfectly rehearsed. She was holding a bouquet of lilies, expensive flowers with a scent so strong it was almost suffocating. They were gilt flowers, or more likely, investment flowers. "Mom, you look great," she said, giving me a quick, careful hug, as if she were afraid of breaking my hip again and delaying her plans. "Come in, Olivia," I said, moving aside with my walker to give her room. She walked in, her eyes scanning the living room, taking everything in. The same look Sophia had given my rehab room. An inventory look. "Wow, the house looks great too. Do you have someone helping you with the cleaning?" "Catherine gives me a hand," I answered, sitting back down in my armchair. "Oh, Catherine, always so helpful," she said with a hint of disdain in her voice. She placed the lilies in an empty vase on the coffee table, a grand, calculated gesture. "So, how are you really feeling? The recovery must be so hard." And so the play began. She sat on the sofa across from me, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap. She asked about the physical therapy, about the medication, about my pain. I answered in monosyllables. Hard, tiring, improving. I wasn't going to give her anything. I wasn't going to give her my pain, my vulnerability. I had done that once, on the bathroom floor, and I had learned my lesson. The small talk lasted about 20 minutes. She talked about her children, about a trip she was planning to Hawaii. The kids just need to unwind, you know? About her husband's work. Every word was a piece in her game. She was painting a picture of a perfect, stable family life, the life of a daughter who deserved to inherit what was rightfully hers. And then, she made the move I was waiting for. "Mom," she began, leaning forward, her voice now soft and serious. "Liam told me about the conversation they had with you at the rehab center, and I know it might have come across as a little too direct, but we are genuinely worried about you." I raised an eyebrow. "Worried?" "Yes, about your future, your safety. We just want what's best for you. And that involves making some important financial decisions to make sure you're taken care of, that you don't have to worry about a thing." She paused, her eyes locked on mine, trying to look sincere. "Have you thought about it? About getting things in order?" There it was, the probe. She wanted to know if the nursing home idea had taken root, if I was ready to sign the papers and hand over my assets to them. The calm I felt was almost frightening. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel hurt, just a surgical coldness. "I have thought about it, Olivia. I've thought about it a lot," I said, my voice coming out perfectly steady. Her face lit up with a poorly disguised relief. "Really? Oh, Mom, that's great. I'm so happy to hear that. We can help you with everything, you know? Looking at the best places, talking to the lawyers." "That won't be necessary," I cut her off. Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I leaned to the side, picking up a thick white envelope from the little table next to my armchair. It was a nice, heavy linen envelope. Inside was a copy of the documents I had signed at Charles's office the day before. I held the envelope out to her. "Here, I've already gotten everything in order. This is for you." Her eyes lit up. A warmth spread across her face, a blush of greed and triumph. She thought it was a check. Maybe the deed to the house, a document that advanced her inheritance, her victory. She took the envelope, her fingers eager, that smug smile returning in full force. "Mom, you didn't have to," she said, her voice full of a false modesty that made me sick to my stomach. "Oh, yes, I did," I said. "It's very important that you read this, carefully, at home." She looked at the envelope, then at me. For a second, I think she sensed something strange in my calmness, in my gaze. But her greed was stronger. She stood up, the envelope held tightly in her hand. "Well, I should get going then," she said. Her hurry to leave and open her prize was obvious. "I have to pick up the kids from school, but we'll talk, okay? Call me if you need anything." "I will," I said. She gave me another quick peck on the air near my cheek and walked towards the door. "Oh, and the lilies. I hope you like them. They brighten up any room." "I'm sure they do," I murmured. I watched her through the window as she practically ran to her BMW, the white envelope visible in her hand. She got in the car, tossed her purse on the passenger seat, and before she even started the engine, I saw her tear open the envelope. I couldn't see her expression from that distance, but I could imagine it. I could imagine her eyes scanning the first lines, the legalese, looking for the numbers, the dollar signs. I could imagine her brow furrowing in confusion, and then the slow, terrifying realization dawning on her face, the exact moment she would read the clauses that removed her, along with her brothers, from every penny, from every brick of the house, from everything. The moment she would realize the envelope didn't contain a check, but a judgment. I watched her car sit there for 1, 2, 5 minutes, and then it screeched away from the curb, the tires singing on the asphalt, and disappeared around the corner. I leaned back in my armchair. The house was quiet again. The smell of the lilies was too strong. I picked up the vase, walked slowly to the front door, opened it, and set the flowers out on the porch. The fresh afternoon air was much better. I closed the door, locked it, and for the first time, I smiled. A small, tired, but real smile. Olivia's world had just exploded, and I had lit the fuse. For the next 2 days after Hurricane Olivia, the house remained blessedly silent. No angry phone calls, no accusatory texts. It was a heavy silence, charged with a contained rage that I could feel vibrating from miles away. Olivia had to be processing it, maybe consulting a lawyer, probably screaming at her husband about the house in Mountain Brook that had just evaporated. She was licking her wounds, planning her next attack. I knew my daughter. It was time to launch the second and third waves. On Thursday morning, I took out 2 more of the same white linen envelopes. I sat at Robert's old desk in the small study, the same desk where he used to pay the bills and help the kids with their homework. The smell of wood and dust was still there. With the same heavy black fountain pen, I addressed one envelope to Mr. Liam Thompson and the other to Mr. Elijah Thompson. Inside each, I placed a copy of the same trust documents, but this time I added a personal note. To Liam, I wrote, "My dear son, I remember the day you graduated from college. Your father and I cried with pride. We gave you every opportunity we never had. It's a shame the only lesson you seem to have learned is that of greed. The house in Mountain Brook will have to wait, perhaps forever. With best regards, your mother." For Elijah, the note was shorter, sharper, reflecting our distant relationship. "Elijah, your silence has always been your loudest answer. In the moment I needed to hear your voice the most, you weren't there. Now, for all legal and financial purposes, I am no longer here for you either. Bernice." I folded the notes, placed them on top of the documents, and sealed the envelopes. That afternoon, I had a courier service deliver them. One to Liam's law firm downtown, the other to the address of Elijah's apartment, which I only had because he'd asked me for security deposit money a year before. The time bombs were on their way. I felt a cathartic relief, as if I had just pulled 3 rotten teeth that had been tormenting me for years. The hardest part, the signature that changed everything, was over. Now it was just the communication, the formality of informing them that the well had run dry. 2 days later, Catherine came over for our Saturday tea. She brought homemade gingerbread cookies and helped me water the plants on the porch. Sitting in the kitchen, with the smell of chamomile tea in the air, I decided to tell her. "Catherine, I did something," I started, my voice low. She set her cup down on its saucer, her eyes attentive and worried. "What kind of something, Bernice?" "I went to the lawyer. I changed my will, my trust fund, everything." She didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly. "I imagine Liam and Sophia's visit had something to do with that." "It had everything to do with it," I confirmed. "They already had my whole life planned out. My house sold, my money spent, and me. Me in some old folks' home, waiting to die." The bitterness in my voice surprised me. "They don't deserve you, Bernice. None of them do," she said, her voice full of a fierce conviction that warmed my heart. We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was the ticking of the clock. And then she asked the question that had been hanging in the air. "So, if it's not them anymore," she hesitated, as if she were walking on eggshells. "Who gets everything when the time comes?" I looked at my friend, at her face, with its expression lines that told stories of laughter and worry, at her hands, which had held mine in the ambulance, which had brought me my jar of shea butter, which were now resting on my kitchen table, hands that helped without asking for anything in return. "Someone who didn't step over me when I needed them most," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Someone who remembered my shea butter." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Bernice," she whispered. "It's not official yet," I said quickly. "I just removed their names. The beneficiary space, it's blank for now. Charles said I can fill it in any time." I didn't want her to feel pressured, for our friendship to change. She just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't have to. I know." I cut her off, placing my hand over hers. "That's why it's you." That night, after Catherine had gone home, I felt at peace. A peace I hadn't felt in a long, long time. The decision was right. The weight of family obligation, an obligation that only went one way, had been lifted. I took out the original documents Charles had given me. There was a separate form, the designation of beneficiary. A blank line was waiting. I picked up the same black pen. I took a deep breath, and with a steady hand, I wrote her full name, Catherine Ann Miller. The moment the final R of Miller touched the paper, my cell phone started vibrating wildly on the table. It was a call from an unknown number. I declined it. It buzzed again. I declined it. And then the text messages started flooding in, one after another. The first was from Liam. "What the hell did you do? Are you insane? I'm coming over there now, and I'm bringing my lawyer." The second, from a number I assumed was Elijah's. "This isn't over. You're going to regret this." And then the phone rang again. It was Olivia. The contained rage had finally exploded. I answered, but said nothing. "How dare you!" she screamed through the phone, her voice shrill and unrecognizable. "After everything we've done for you, you're a senile, ungrateful old woman. We'll have you committed. We'll prove you're not in your right mind. You are not getting away with this." The storm had finally hit, and I was ready, standing in the eye of the hurricane, holding the paper with my real family's name on it. Olivia's shrill voice echoed in my ear for a few seconds before I hung up the phone. The receiver was silent in my hand, but her screams continued to reverberate in the quiet of my house. "Senile, ungrateful old woman. We'll have you committed." The threats were childish, desperate, the sounds of spoiled children who just had their favorite toy taken away. And that's exactly what I was to them. A toy, an ATM, a convenience. I put my phone on silent. The flood of messages and missed calls could wait. I took the form with Catherine's name on it and placed it back in the plastic folder, along with the copies of the signed documents. A shiver ran down my spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was the adrenaline of the coming battle. They had declared war, and I wasn't going to back down. I spent the next few days in a tense calm, waiting for the next offensive. I knew Liam's threats of bringing a lawyer weren't empty. He was an arrogant man who believed the world owed him everything, including my money. Olivia was more dangerous. She was driven by emotion, by humiliation. The idea of losing the status my inheritance would have provided her was unbearable for her. And Elijah, He would just follow his siblings, as he always had, a shadow with no will of his own. My mind worked non-stop, replaying every possible scenario. Could they try to have me declared incompetent? Charles had already reassured me about that. The day I signed the papers, he made sure to have a second witness and asked me a series of questions to record my mental clarity. "Bernice, do you understand that this action is permanent?" he had asked. "Do you understand that you are removing your children as heirs to all of your assets?" I had answered everything with a firmness that left no room for doubt. Charles was a good lawyer. He was prepared. Still, the idea gnawed at me. The humiliation of having to prove my sanity in a courtroom against my own children. The ugliness of the legal battle that loomed on the horizon. Did I have the strength for it? It was Catherine who pulled me out of this spiral of thoughts. She showed up at my door 2 days later, a worried expression on her face. "Bernice, I saw your son Liam's car driving slowly down the street last night," she said, getting straight to the point. "And this morning, a woman I've never seen before was standing on the sidewalk, just looking at your house. She stood there for a good 10 minutes. My heart sank. They were watching me. Maybe it was a private investigator. They were trying to collect proof of my senility. Thank you for telling me, Catherine. Are you all right?" she asked, her hand touching my arm. I took a deep breath. I will be. They're not going to intimidate me. Not anymore. But the truth was, I was shaken. That night, the big house felt spooky. Every creak of the floorboards, every tree branch scraping against the window, made me jump. I went to Robert's desk and opened the bottom drawer. There, under a stack of old photo albums, was the small metal box where Robert kept his important documents. Inside it, along with his birth certificate and army medals, was a small pistol, a .38 revolver he had bought for protection years ago after a string of burglaries in the neighborhood. He'd taught me how to use it, even took me to a shooting range a few times. "Just in case, Bernice," he'd say. "I hope you never have to." I held the gun in my hand. It was heavy, cold. I had no intention of ever using it, but just knowing it was there, having a last resort for defense in my own home, gave me a strange sense of power. I was not a helpless victim. This was my fortress, and I would defend it. 2 days later, the letter arrived. Official letterhead from the law firm Thompson, Davies & Finch. My son Liam's firm. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a formal notification, full of legalese, stating that my children were contesting the validity of the amendment to my living trust on the grounds of undue influence and diminished mental capacity. They were demanding a full psychiatric evaluation to be conducted by a doctor of their choosing. I read the letter 2-3 times. Undue influence. The only influence I'd had was from their own neglect and greed. Diminished mental capacity. My mind had never been clearer. I called Charles immediately. I read the letter to him out loud. He listened in silence. "Don't you worry, Bernice," he said when I finished. "This is standard procedure. It's an intimidation tactic. They don't have a case, and they know it. We'll respond formally. And no, you will not be submitting to a psychiatric evaluation of their choosing. If the court demands one, it will be by a neutral professional appointed by the court. But I doubt it will even get that far." His confidence calmed me, but the war had officially begun. I was being sued by my own children. That afternoon, sitting on the porch, looking at Robert's rose bushes, I felt a deep exhaustion, a weariness from the fight. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if it was worth it. Maybe it would be easier to just give in, to give them what they wanted, to have some peace at the end of my life. And then, Catherine's Buick pulled up to the curb. She got out of the car with some effort, carrying a bag of rose fertilizer. "I thought these ladies here could use a little snack," she said, smiling, gesturing to my flowers. She spent the next hour on her knees in the dirt, with her gardening gloves on, loosening the soil around my roses, working in the fertilizer with a care that was almost reverent. She talked about the soil, about the importance of nitrogen, about how Robert used to say roses needed real food to bloom. I watched her work, the sweat glistening on her brow, the dirt under her fingernails. She wasn't doing it for money. She wasn't doing it out of obligation. She was doing it because she cared. Because she saw those rose bushes not just as plants, but as the living memory of my husband. Because she saw me. And in that moment, all doubt vanished. The peace I craved wouldn't come from surrender. It would come from justice. They wanted a fight? They would get one. And I was no longer fighting just for myself or for Robert's legacy. I was fighting for Catherine, for kindness, for decency, for everything my children had spit on. When Catherine was finished, she sat beside me on the porch swing, wiping her earthy hands on a cloth. "There now, they'll be happy," she said. "Catherine," I said, my voice thick with an emotion that surprised me, "I want to thank you for everything." "Nonsense, Bernice. That's what friends do." "No," I insisted. "I want you to know, whatever happens now, with this fight with my children, don't change your mind. What I did from the heart. And there's no amount of money in the world that can pay for the peace of mind you've given me." She just smiled, a tired, beautiful smile, and squeezed my hand. And I knew that no matter how ugly the battle got, I wasn't alone anymore. The calm before the storm lasted exactly 1 week. It was a strange week. The silence from my children was heavy, threatening. I knew they were planning something, guided by Liam and his legal arrogance. I spent most of my time in the garden with Catherine, tending to the roses as if it were therapy. The dark soil under my nails, the scent of the blooms, the warm sun on my back. It all anchored me to reality, reminded me of what was real and lasting. Charles called me on Tuesday. "Bernice, we've received their response to our letter. They're requesting a mediation hearing. They insist on discussing the situation amicably before taking it to court." "Amicably?" I snorted. "The last time they were amicable, they were trying to put me in a nursing home." "It's a play, Bernice. They want to get you in a room, pressure you, make you feel guilty. They'll probably bring Olivia to cry and Liam to make veiled threats about the cost of a lawsuit. They think they can wear you down." "They can try," I said, feeling that cold anger stir inside me. "I'm not going anywhere, Charles. If they want to talk to me, they can come here. This is my house." "I figured you'd say that." "I'll inform them, but be prepared, Bernice. This means they're coming to your territory." "Let them come," I replied, and hung up. The visit was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I spent the whole morning preparing, not physically, but mentally. I brewed a pot of my strongest peppermint tea, and most importantly, I went to Robert's desk. I took the plastic folder with the documents and placed 2 copies on the living room coffee table, right in plain sight. They were like 2 landmines waiting to be stepped on. At 3 o'clock sharp, I heard the familiar sound of Olivia's BMW parking on the street, followed by a car I didn't recognize. But I didn't have to wait for the doorbell. I heard the sound I hadn't heard in months, a sound that chilled me to the bone. A key turning in the lock of my front door. They were using the old key I had given them years ago. They weren't coming as guests. They were coming in. The door opened. Liam and Olivia walked in. Liam was wearing an expensive suit, his leather briefcase under his arm, the serious, calculated expression of a lawyer about to enter battle. Olivia was beside him, her face pale, her eyes red, as if she'd spent hours rehearsing a convincing cry. She looked like a widow at a funeral, not a daughter visiting her mother. I glanced past them through the open door and saw Elijah, my youngest, waiting in the car, like a coward's getaway driver. He didn't even have the courage to come inside. "Mother," Liam said, his voice deep and formal, as if he were addressing a jury. "We need to talk." I didn't say a word. I just gestured to the sofa with my hand. They sat down, stiff, on the edge of the cushion, at a safe distance from me. The performance began. It was Olivia who spoke first, her voice a trembling, rehearsed whisper. "Mom, why are you doing this to us? We love you. We're your family." I just stared at her, my silence my only response. I let her words hang in the air and die, hollow and false as they were. Liam took over. He opened his briefcase but didn't take out any papers. It was just a prop, a symbol of power. "Mother, what you've done is legally questionable. To make a decision of this magnitude, under emotional and physical stress, without consulting your family, a judge could easily see that as a sign of instability." The threat was clear. "We don't want it to get to that point," Olivia chimed in, a single tear rolling down her perfectly made-up face. "We just want to make sure you're safe, that your future is secure. That's why we suggested assisted living, a place where you'd have constant care, where you wouldn't have to worry about a thing. The audacity was otherworldly. After they'd received the letters, after being disinherited, their tactic wasn't to apologize. It was to double down, to try and convince me that the nursing home idea was for my own good. They were trying to make me doubt my own mind, to paint me as a confused old woman who needed to be saved from herself. I listened to them in silence for nearly 10 minutes. They took turns, Liam with the rational arguments and legal threats, Olivia with the emotional appeals and crocodile tears. It was a well-choreographed performance. When they finally paused, waiting for my reaction, for my surrender, I said nothing. I just leaned forward, with the slowness my hips still demanded. My hand rested on the 2 copies of the documents on the coffee table. The paper was cool to the touch. I picked them up. The slight rustle of the paper was the only sound in the room. Without looking at them, I held the papers out in their direction. They looked at each other, confused. The smug look on Liam's face began to falter. Olivia stopped crying. "What's this?" Liam asked, his voice suspicious. "Read it," I said. My first and only words in the conversation. Hesitantly, Liam took 1 copy. Olivia leaned in to read with him. Their eyes scanned the first page. I saw Liam's jaw tighten. Olivia's eyes widened. They flipped to the second page, the amendment page, with their names clearly removed. And then they flipped to the third page, the designation of beneficiary form, with the name Catherine Ann Miller, written in unmistakable black ink. The silence in the room became heavy, electric. I could practically hear their thoughts spinning, the initial shock giving way to disbelief, and disbelief turning into a seismic fury. Liam's face, which had been a mask of professional control, began to contort. A vein pulsed in his forehead. Olivia's lips parted in a silent "oh" of pure horror. The performance was over. Reality had arrived, and it was far more brutal than anything they could have imagined. The paper trembled in Liam's hand. He looked up from the document to me, his eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. The mask of the concerned son and competent lawyer disintegrated, revealing the face of an enraged man who had just lost the lottery. "Catherine Miller?" He spat the name out like it was poison. "The neighbor? You gave everything to the neighbor?" His voice rose from a disbelieving whisper to a restrained shout. "You changed everything without telling us? You can't do this." "I can," I said, my voice calm and quiet, but it cut through the tense air in the room like a razor. "And I did." "This is undue influence," he snarled, getting up from the sofa, the document crumpled in his hand. He started pacing, a caged animal. "That woman, she took advantage of you. She saw you were vulnerable and she got in your head. We'll prove it in court. We'll have this whole charade thrown out." I looked at Olivia, who was still sitting, pale, her eyes fixed on nothing. The crocodile tears had dried, leaving just a faint smudge of mascara. "Undue influence, Liam?" I asked, my gaze locking onto him. "Let me tell you about influence. It's your sister stepping over my body while I beg for help on the floor. It's you and your wife plotting to stick me in a nursing home to get your hands on my money. That, my son, is influence. An influence that taught me exactly what I needed to do to protect myself from you." Olivia finally reacted. She lifted her head, her eyes filled with a genuine-looking outrage, as if she were the victim. "That's not fair. I was late. I had an important meeting. I didn't know it was that serious," she stammered, the excuses sounding pathetic even to her own ears. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Late, a meeting. Olivia, I could have been dead. I could have had a stroke, a heart attack. And your excuse would be, I had a meeting? You didn't know it was serious? You saw me on the floor, unable to move. You heard the panic in my voice. Don't you dare stand there and lie to me. Not anymore." My gaze turned to her, hard and unforgiving. "You made your choice that morning in the bathroom, Olivia. Every click of your high heels down that hallway was a step away from this family, away from any right you thought you had. I made my choice the next day, lying in that hospital bed, realizing the only person who cared if I lived or died was the woman who lived across the street." "But she's not your family," Olivia cried, her voice breaking. She's more family to me than you all have been for the last 10 years. I shot back, my own voice rising for the first time. Family doesn't step over you when you're down. Family doesn't show up only to ask for money. Family doesn't plan to discard you in a home like a piece of trash. Family remembers your shea butter. The detail caught them both off guard. They glanced at each other, confusion on their faces. Shea butter? To them, it was a meaningless, trivial detail. They didn't get it, and the fact that they didn't get it proved my entire point. You don't understand, do you? I said, shaking my head slowly. You think my legacy is this house, the money in the bank. You think that's what this is about. Robert and I didn't build this house so you could sell it to buy a bigger car or a swimming pool. We built it to be a home, a place of love, of support, of sacrifice, values you've forgotten, values you've trampled on your way to the mall. Liam stopped pacing. He glared at me, his face red with rage. You're going to regret this, Mother. We'll drag you and your little friend through the ugliest lawsuit this town has ever seen. We'll expose everything. Expose what, Liam? I challenged him. That your 68-year-old mother, after being abandoned by her children, decided to leave her assets to the one person in the world who showed her a shred of human decency? Good luck with that case in court. Defeated, Olivia slumped on the couch. She whispered, more to herself than to me, the words that sealed the end of everything. You're throwing away your legacy, our family's legacy. I looked at her with a deep sadness. Underneath all the anger, there was just an immense ache for having failed them somehow, for them having become these people. No, Olivia, I said, my voice soft now, but firm as a rock. I'm not throwing it away. I'm making sure it isn't wasted. I'm leaving it with someone who understands what legacy is, someone who understands what family is. A heavy silence fell in the room. There was nothing left to say. The threats, the tears, the accusations, it had all run out. They looked at me, one last time, not with love or sadness, but with the cold hatred of defeat. Liam picked up his briefcase. Olivia stood up, straightening her skirt, her face a marble mask. They walked to the door without looking back. I heard them go down the porch steps, their footsteps heavy and lifeless. I heard the car doors slam, the engines start, and then the sound of them driving away, fading down the street. The front door was still ajar. The afternoon sun streamed in, lighting up the dust motes in the air. I got up, used my walker, and slowly made my way to the door. I pushed it shut until the latch clicked into place. I turned the deadbolt. Then, the security chain. The house fell silent. But this time, it wasn't a heavy or lonely silence. It was a clean silence, peaceful. For the first time in a very, very long time, my fortress was secure. And the peace I felt was my final victory. When the door closed and the lock slid into place, the sound echoed through the house, not as an ending, but as a beginning. The air, which had been heavy with their invasive presence and silent demands, now felt light, clean. The afternoon sun streamed through the living room window, lighting up the little swirls of dust, and for the first time they didn't look like a sign of neglect to me, but like tiny particles dancing in celebration of the peace. Robert's fortress was finally quiet, and it was a liberating silence. The weeks that followed were the most peaceful I'd had in a decade. The silence from my children, which once hurt me, was now a blessing. No phone calls on Sunday to cancel lunch at the last minute. No text messages starting with, "Mom, I need a favor." No constant anxiety of waiting for the next demand, the next disappointment. Charles informed me that Liam had, in fact, filed the lawsuit, but that their chances were next to nothing, and I shouldn't worry. And for the first time, I believed him. My life found a new rhythm, a slower, sweeter rhythm, dictated by the sun and my own will. My recovery progressed by leaps and bounds. Soon, I was trading the walker for a cane, and then, not even that. The ache in my hip became a memory, an occasional twinge that served to remind me not of the fall, but of the rebirth that followed. My friendship with Catherine blossomed. She was no longer just the helpful neighbor. She became my sister of the soul. Our afternoons were filled with the simple things that give life its flavor. She brought me tomato and basil seedlings, and we planted them in pots on the back porch. Tending to those small plants, watching life sprout from the dark earth, was a metaphor for my own healing. We fixed the squeaky hinge on the pantry door, a task my sons had promised to do for 5 years and never did. Catherine and I, with a screwdriver and some oil, fixed it in 10 minutes, laughing like 2 schoolgirls. We talked about everything. About our late husbands, about the joys and sorrows of widowhood, about the books we were reading, about the outrageous price of avocados at Kroger. And sometimes we talked about my children. I told her about the letters, about the confrontation, about the lawsuit. She listened without judgment, her hand resting on mine, offering silent, unwavering support. She never once asked me about the money. She never brought up the trust fund. And that was the final proof that I had made the right choice. One afternoon, about 2 months after that final visit, I was sitting at Robert's desk. The sun was streaming through the window, golden and soft. I felt strong, inside and out. I took out some nice stationery, the kind Robert used to use to write to his mother, and my black fountain pen. And I started to write. I wrote 3 letters. To Liam, I wrote about pride and disappointment. I dreamed you would be the pillar of this family, the strong, just man your father was. But somewhere along the way, you confused strength with hardness and justice with entitlement. You only wanted to own the building, and you forgot about the people who lived inside it. To Olivia, I wrote about the loss of an illusion. On that bathroom floor, I didn't just lose my balance. I lost the illusion that you were still the little girl I sang to sleep. That day, I didn't see my daughter. I saw a stranger in a hurry, and a mother's heart can only break in a certain way, one time. And to Elijah, I wrote about the weight of nothingness. Your sin was not cruelty, my son. It was cowardice. It was absence. In all the important moments, you chose not to be there. And in the end, your absence became a presence so large, it left no room for anything else. They weren't letters of hate. They were goodbyes. They were the final words I needed to say, not for them, but for me. I folded each letter carefully, put them in envelopes, but I didn't write any addresses. They weren't meant to be sent. They were meant to be kept. I opened my old, worn leather purse, the one that held my life in receipts and little treasures. I placed the 3 envelopes inside, along with the copies of the trust documents. I zipped it shut. The past was now contained, closed, in its proper place, carried by me, but no longer defining me. That evening, I was in the kitchen, making dinner. The house was quiet, but it was a good quiet, a peaceful quiet. I put the kettle on the stove for some tea. As I waited for the water to boil, I looked out the window at the sky turning pink. The first low whistle of the kettle started, growing into a steady, cheerful shriek, and in that moment, I knew. The sound of the boiling kettle was the soundtrack to my new life, simple, warm, and entirely my own. It was the only sound that mattered. Today, almost a year later, I live a life I never thought possible, a life of peace. Liam, Olivia, and Elijah are around somewhere. Their lawsuit was thrown out by the judge months ago, deemed frivolous and vexatious. Not only did they lose any chance of touching my estate, but they were also ordered to pay all legal costs, including Charles's fees. They lost everything they tried to steal from me and what little dignity they had left. They don't call me. I don't call them. Their silence is now permanent. I've learned that blood makes you related, but it's loyalty, care, and compassion that make you family. And sometimes, the family you choose, the one who stops everything to bring you a jar of shea butter, is stronger and more true than the family that blood gave you. And you? What would you have done in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. And if you liked my story, please leave a like on the video so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you for all the love. On the screen now you'll see a couple of other stories that I'm sure you'll like. Go ahead and click to watch. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story.